Welcome to industrialscripts.co.uk, home of the Insider Interviews, a series of Q&As with people currently working at various levels and in different areas of the British film industry. The interviews are absolutely exclusive to Industrial Scripts and can't be accessed anywhere else.
Into the blast furnace this month, we welcome film journalist Nev Pearce. After graduating from Bournemouth University and earning the necessary NCTJ qualifications, Nev began his journalism career editing the university's fortnightly paper. Soon after, he began freelancing for Total Film and worked as production editor for the prestigious current affairs magazine Third Way. He then went on to work for the BBC before returning to Total Film as reviews editor. Currently, though, Nev is editor-at-large for Empire magazine. As always, this interview was produced by Evan Leighton Davis and edited by Steve McCarthy.
So welcome, Nev. Thanks for joining us. So going back to the beginning, did you always want to be a journalist, or were you more particular than that and wanted to be a film journalist, film critic?
At the beginning, I wanted to be a lawyer. Then I realised that would be far too much work. So when I was 14, I decided to be a journalist. And I went to university, took a journalism degree at Bournemouth University, and my intention was to get into journalism, obviously, but I didn't know what area. It was only after I graduated and I stood for election to the student council and started running the student paper, which was my first job, that I sort of put two and two together. When I really like writing and I really like films and I know quite a lot about them, so maybe there's something I can do here. So I went from that to, I got some work experience at Total Film after I'd applied for a job there and been rejected. And I think that they were struck by the fact that I was still happy to come in and do work experience and wasn't sulking in the corner about not getting the job. And because of that, I think they gave me my first shot, which was a VHS review of Little Voice. And so I did that. Over the next few months, I contributed the odd piece to them freelance. So there's 6 months on my CV which says freelancing. I was effectively unemployed. I was writing VHS reviews for them. I was living in Slough, I was newly married, my wife was working and supporting us, and I was basically spending every day going down the cinema with I bought a pass, a monthly pass, so you could go and see as many films as you wanted. So I would go and see everything that was coming out, so that when Dan Jolin, who was the reviews editor at Total Film, phoned to say, have you seen this? I need a VHS review, I could say, yes, I have.
See, that's the commitment you need.
So I saw some terrible, terrible films in the salubrious surroundings of Slough Cinema. And that lasted for about 6 months, and I went to work for a current affairs magazine called Third Way, who were looking for a production editor, and a friend of a friend was editing there, which got me the interview. That was only part-time, and I was carrying on doing freelance work for Total Film. Then I left there and went to a website called Popcorn, which no longer exists, or I think it exists as like a children's film website now.
Backtracking a little bit, you obviously studied at Bournemouth University, which has a great track record of getting people into the industry. And in this kind of landscape, I guess, of sometimes DIY courses and a big scepticism right now about the value of a degree in general in terms of getting into the media, what did you take from your course, and also how critical do you think the NCTJ stamp has been in helping you on your way?
I'm not sure that having the NCTJ qualifications makes any difference to me in film journalism exactly, other than perhaps it gives you legitimacy. I mean, it's certainly going to make you stand out from the crowd. And also, practically speaking, it was very useful to have all those skills. And they're still useful. I still use the shorthand, albeit not very well. And it taught me a lot. Those kind of practical applications were helpful. In terms of the world of journalism, film journalism, I don't think people really care what degree you did or what your qualifications are. It's just, can you write well about film? If you can, then you're okay. In terms of learning about journalism, I obviously learnt loads from the course. It was multidiscipline, TV, radio and print. The most I learnt, though, was probably a work experience stint I did on a local paper. We had to do a work placement, and I was supposed to do it for 2 weeks. I stayed for 3 months in the summer, and I started writing about film for them, just a little column in the North Devon Journal, and just doing everything that I could, writing about whatever I could. And that toughens you up quick, because you have a regional newspaper editor or news editor saying, I'm not putting this expletive deleted in my paper. And you go, okay, my hunch that it wasn't good enough was definitely correct. So I learned a lot doing that. You learn about, I did loads of work experience, really. I did work experience of BBC TV and radio. I did as much of that as I could. Part of that was just to figure out what I felt like I enjoyed as well as it meant that I could get onto the degree in the first place, because it was very competitive and my grades weren't great. So I needed to show lots of other endeavour.
Mm-hmm. This transition from student to your first bits of work in the industry is so often the toughest, people think. How was it for you, and looking back, what did you take from those experiences as well?
I think you have to combine the willingness to learn with bulletproof self-confidence. And that's a difficult thing, in as much as there are plenty of people who've got self-confidence bordering on arrogance, but don't listen. They think they're brilliant. It's like, well, if they were even half as brilliant as they think they are, they'd be flying, but they're not. But at the same time, you have to have enough confidence to keep on going, because you will get ignored. Empire, who I write for now, never replied to any of my work experience queries. Not once did they reply to an email, or a letter, or a phone call.
Those bastards.
Exactly. I think some of those bastards still work there. And so you can either sulk about that and go, oh, well, I really want to work for Empire, or do stuff for them, or go, well, who else do I apply to? I actually think I applied to Total Film already at that point. I always had a tendency to favour the underdog magazine. Neon was the magazine I really loved. Neon was the magazine that made me want to be a film journalist. I was fortunate in terms of breaking in, because I had the opportunity to just sit there in my flat in Slough waiting for the phone to ring. And I did other things. Like I said, I watched a lot of films and prepared myself for that, but I didn't have to go and earn a living, because my wife was earning a living. So that gave me a few months of grace. And if we didn't have any money, and I, would do hideous things like the washing up at home. I was so bored. But just never say no to work was the other thing. And if you're asked to do something, just do it straight away, and do it as quickly as you can, and as well as you can. And that pulls you out from the crowd again. It's amazing how few people do that. It's amazing how few people, if you ask for a 120-word review, sample review, and you want it in 2 days' time, get you a 120-word sample review in 2 days' time. They might get you a 400-word review and go, well, I got a little bit carried away. That's not going to help, is it? If you want it published at any point, you need to hit the word count. You need to make sure it matches the style of who you're writing for. Don't mark out of 10 if it's a 5-star scale. Just simple stuff like that, really. Don't write Dear Sir or Madam, find out who it is you want to talk to. And it still amazes me how few people do that. Phone up and find out. It might be difficult to get someone on the phone, but, that's kind of the hurdle. The hurdles are there for, it's maybe not the most efficient way to weed people out, but it is a way to weed people out and make sure that people who get through are really, really dedicated. Because you've got to do it for love, because you certainly ain't doing it for money.
In your career, you've been fairly transient in terms of working for different outlets. How important do you think having sort of a range of income streams and moving around the industry early on is as a film journalist? There seems to be far more movement in this area, it strikes me, than perhaps in other areas of the film business in this country.
Once people are on staff at film magazines, though, they don't tend to leave. It's like there would need to be some kind of cull for new writers to be able to get in, which is understandable because it's a good gig. I left because different opportunities presented themselves. So to go and work for the BBC was interesting. I knew it would be a new experience, and I knew I felt I could do what I was doing at Total Film originally when I was originally production editor. I felt like I knew how to do it, whereas this was a new thing, what I could learn from. So I would say, actually, though, when people do get on staff at film magazines, they don't move very often. And if they do move, it's over to another film magazine.
Right now, you're editor-at-large of Empire. Is there such a thing as a typical day for you right now, or Is
No.
it as varied as the job title suggests?
Yeah, it's pretty much as varied as the job title suggests. I mean, I don't exclusively work for Empire, although that's the bulk of my work. And it's feast or famine with work, it tends to be. You know, you'll find you'll have a couple of weeks where there's not a great deal going on. And then you'll find that there are 3 different things that require attention. And you need to be here, there, you need to be in that country, and then in that country, or filing that piece. There's no real logic to it other than, I guess, the cycle of the magazines, the time of the year, what work is available, what stuff the guys in the office don't want to do, and that they want to give out, or what stuff they think you'd be particularly suited to, or what stuff that you've thought of and are pushing. I mean, I haven't had a cover feature at Empire, for example, which is something I would like, don't get me wrong, but also it's partly because I don't really share the sensibility of some of the films that we put on the cover, and I'm not knocking the decision to put them on the cover, because a lot of them will sell very well as magazines, and a lot of the films will do very well. But I'm not particularly interested in writing 2,500 words on some of those films. Mm-hmm. And that's actually flattering to me, because that's giving the impression that I've turned down work, and I haven't. I've only turned down work in as much as not physically not being able to do it because of not having the time.
What's the part of the job that you enjoy the most? Is it the high-profile star interviews, or researching features, or writing a review of a film you really engage with?
Interviewing directors is my favourite thing.
Yeah.
I really enjoy interviewing actors as well. Interviews full stop. It didn't used to be. I used to enjoy reviewing more. And I still do enjoy reviewing, but I don't watch very many films now. I don't live in London. So it's quite rare that I'll review stuff. And it has to be something that I'm in town for. I can get a screening or I can get a DVD off, and it's something I really, really want to see. If I'm going to make a trip for it when it's 5 hours on a train from where I live. Interviewing can be thrilling though. It can be great. If you've got somebody you admire especially, or somebody you find interesting, and if you've had the time to prepare properly, it's a great opportunity to sit down for 2 hours with David Fincher. I think I feel incredibly blessed to have that chance, which may sound a little bit obsequious, but whichever actor or director it is, a lot of them are at the top of their game. You can learn an awful lot, and you can draw stuff out, and that's exciting.
Apart from Fincher, are there any other directors that particularly stood out?
I recently interviewed Ken Loach, which was great. I mean, I don't know whether the interview's great, that's for other people to judge, but I had fun doing it. And Mark Romanek for Never Let Me Go, which is a film I absolutely adored. I do appear to be in a minority on that, but that's fine. Everyone else is wrong. And I loved speaking with him. I thought he was very, again, smart and articulate and honest, and would answer questions which might have been awkward. And it's just, if you can be fortunate enough to get those opportunities to speak with people whose work you admire, and even if it's stuff you don't like about it, or as long as you're offering your inquiries in a spirit of sort of honest inquiry, it's like your own private film school.
Obviously, the top job, that of an editor, is a huge undertaking. How did you find your 2-year tenure as editor of Total Film, and what were the parts of the job you enjoyed the most, and on the flip side, what were the parts of the job that you found difficult?
The exciting thing about editing is the sense of possibility. The frustrating thing about editing is what actually happens. Because it's the version of the magazine that's in your head, but then there's the reality of resources, and of time, and of access, and of how many issues you have to do in a year, and how much money you have to do it with, and the endless meetings that
you sound like a filmmaker.
Exactly. I think that there are parallels there when I've seen directors at work and producers at work to editing a magazine, because you're trying to corral a group of people into one. You're trying to get everyone's intentions in line to create one thing that has a certain tone, hopefully a strong tone, hopefully it's informed and it's funny. And there's lots of different personalities which you have to interact with and you recognise. And I feel like I got better at it over time. But that was the interesting, I can say interesting now, at the time it was very difficult. Challenge is understanding that different people react in different ways. You can't be the same all the time. You should be the same, you should be consistent, you should be honourable. But there are some people who you can be very blunt with, and there are some people who need an arm around the shoulder. There are some people you can just get that done, and they'll get that done. And there are other people who you can, will you please do this, and they see that as almost as a weakness, I think. So it's interesting to sort of recognise the differences in personalities and how to manage people, and I found that a challenge. And you're at Future Publishing, Total Film's the biggest magazine there, so you're under a lot of pressure to make sure you deliver. And every success that you have, I guess, ultimately is what you're measured against. So if you do a brilliantly selling issue, an issue that sells brilliantly well with a great world exclusive, that's enjoyable, but it's enjoyable for about 5 minutes, because then the next issue comes along and suddenly you've moved the bar up to what you're going to be assessed on. I loved having an idea and then seeing it executed, and picking up the magazine and thinking, we did this, we made this, and that's something that you couldn't get anywhere else. That's something which another magazine wouldn't do. And remembering how I felt when I read film magazines when I was 17 or 18, and thinking, can I give that 17 or 18-year-old that excitement about what it is like to be in this world, to meet this person, to see this being shot. So that's great. The downside for me was the stuff that takes you away from journalism, which is the marketing of it, and the meetings, and the finance, and that side of things, which certain editors at certain magazines, I think, would have the opportunity to farm out. They would have like a PA, or a head of finance, or such and such. Well, I never had that. So you could easily get bogged down in stuff which you can do, but spreadsheets is... I'm a Word person, I'm not a spreadsheet person. I'm a Word, not Excel, so... And you have to be careful with editing. There's so much stuff, you can get very focused on little details, and you need to be able to step back and accept that, yes, okay, that paragraph is not written in the best way it could be, but it's 1 in the morning, and you need to finish proofreading this, and you need to get it to press. So it's understanding when you have to compromise and what things you have to compromise on. And I was up against Mark Dinning as editor of Empire, who I think is the best editor that magazine's had, who has tremendous instincts about what the readers want to see. Much better instincts than mine, I think. And I'm not just saying that now because he's my boss, because obviously he's a colossal arsehole. But I think, you watch him make decisions, he seems to have an instinctual grasp of what's going to be popular and what people are going to want to see, and he invariably gets it right. I mean, he messes up occasionally, like everyone does. Whereas I think I was more governed by what I would like to see, perhaps too much, in terms of being massively commercially successful, although the magazine did well. And the other thing is, you editing Total Film is in some ways harder than editing Empire, because you have less opportunity, because Empire is the big dog. Empire gets offered everything first. Empire has an extra 10 years on that magazine. So there's that constant fight. But that's part of what makes it interesting. And I don't regret doing it. I really enjoyed it. I learned an awful lot. And I learned stuff about myself, some stuff that I would rather not ever have learned, but that's what jobs are worthwhile, aren't they? To do jobs that you find interesting or intimidating or a bit scary, and you learn stuff about yourself and about other people. And if you're not learning, then move on. I mean, I don't think I've been in any job for longer than 2 years. I was at Total Film for about 5 years, but I was in different positions, which is not to say that I would never stay in a job for longer than 2 years. I mean, actually, the position at Empire now I've held longer than 2 years. But you always, I think, have to feel like you're moving forward, that you're learning something. And if there's a sustained period where you feel like, I can do this, by your own judgment, I mean, other people might say, oh, you can't bloody do it. But if you feel by your own judgment, I can do this and I'm not learning anymore, well, it's time to start looking for something else.
Moving on to, I guess, the critic and the view of the critic right now. The perceived wisdom seems to be that in terms of a critic's ability to influence a film's fortunes, they've never been more redundant than right now. You can obviously contrast that with the Pauline Kael era where critics could almost sink a movie with one review. What's your, I guess, take on that view of the film critic these days, and also, I guess, your view on the effect film publicity and the power of the armchair reviewer, the armchair film critic blogger has had on the role or even the prestige of the film critic.
I think the key change for film criticism or film reviewing, and I'd say really, as much as I like the title film critic, I'm a film reviewer really rather than a film critic, in terms of, I don't know whether it's Adam Smith or Kim Newman said the difference between a reviewer and a critic is a critic will tell you the ending. The big difference now is everything's available. The films are available. When Pauline Kael was writing about film, you couldn't see them. You know, once they'd had their run, that was it, until some cinema got them back. Couldn't get them on VHS. So there was a pleasure in reading that stuff, I imagine, at the time, because it was capturing your love of the movies. And if you hadn't seen the movie, well, at least you got a sense of what it was like. It's like if you read Kenneth Tynan about theatre, you know, you'll never recreate that performance, but you read him writing about it. You know, you read him talking about the experience of seeing it, and it's something else, and it's something to be relished and enjoyed. The thing now is you can just watch it. You don't need to read it. And people make decisions much quicker, I think, because it's much less of a commitment. Beforehand, it was like, right, I have to go down to the pictures, I have to wait. When's that film going to be on? I have to do this. Now I can download it. Click. I'll have it in 20 minutes. So you can make decisions a lot quicker, I think, about what you watch, which means that being informed about what you watch isn't necessarily as important. It's not as perceived as being as important, I think.
Do you feel as well, though, that that whole Hollywood PR machine has become incredibly powerful and sophisticated, and you know, there was that story about them putting out G.I. Joe, not even doing press screenings, and just putting it out in sort of areas of America that were highly likely to respond favourably to it.
Film studios don't need critics. I think they need film magazines, or they're useful to have film magazines and film websites, because they need to get the message out. What's interesting and terrifying, frankly, if you're a film journalist, is just with the rise of Twitter and Facebook, is pictures being released straight from the filmmakers straight into these communities. So they're taking away the idea of the film magazine or the film website as the arbiter of taste and as the gateway. Now, I think magazines will survive and film websites will survive because there comes a point where people do want stuff to be selected for them. Because there's so much stuff out there. If you find a critic that you really like, or a journalist whose work you really like, you know, right, if I read something by Damon Wise, I'm going to find something interesting here. And if he says this film is good, then even if I don't agree with him, I know that there's a certain type of movie, maybe, because I've read him for a long time. And I think there is a distinct value to that. But we may be going through a period where that's getting tested.
Mm.
I don't want to be direct marketed to. I want people who know about film to put their voices in and give their opinions. I mean, DVD commentaries, I think, are brilliant, but the best commentaries are the ones where there are two people there. So that's ideally the role of the journalist, is to bring things out of people which people wouldn't necessarily want to share or even think to share. So you listen to the Soderbergh-Romanek commentary on Bubble. It's brilliant. You've got two world-class filmmakers asking each other's questions about the process. Whereas Solo, sometimes those commentaries can be a bit dull. And that's got to be the role of the journalist, isn't it, to try and give a window to that world. I mean, we're not Woodward and Bernstein. Well, some people might like to pretend that they are, with their earth-shattering exclusives. But it's film journalism. It ain't brain surgery. We're not saving kids' lives. But we do have the opportunity to share these experiences and to give people an idea of what the intention was of the filmmakers. And I think that's valuable. But it is definitely under duress.
Total Film and Empire are obviously market leaders in terms of film magazines in the UK, have been for as far back as people can remember. How do you feel they differ, and what are their different kind of strengths and weaknesses, and what do they bring to the consumer that are different?
I might take the fifth on that.
Fair enough, that's your choice.
Well, it's only in as much as I don't read Total Film, and that's not a knock on Total Film at all. I've got friends who still work there. I'm sure there's some good work done there. It's that I get Nam-style flashbacks to proofreading it. So I can talk about how it was 2 years ago, and I think the distinction between the magazines has always been a bit confused. Because Total Film was launched as a magazine that was to do with action cinema and girls and guns and boom and hey, Con Air is our favourite movie in the world ever. And then it kind of came something which was a bit like Empire, and then wanted to be like Empire, and wanted to take over Empire. And I think the truth is Empire is pretty unassailable. You know, if it suffers, then it will suffer because the film mag market suffers. When that happens, in the way that Music Mag suffered. But it's just so established it means film now for people, I think. So I would suggest that the way to what we should do, I'm not Total Film anymore, but what Total Film should do
Freudian slip.
is be distinctive and offer an alternative. But then it's about, can you make the money work on that model?
Sure.
But the truth is, when Neon closed, I think Neon was selling 30,000 copies a month, which was actually not bad. I mean, it's not a great figure compared to Empire, but for a very distinct flavour of magazine, which probably didn't cost a lot to make. It's like Little White Lies is doing quite well for itself, isn't it? That's my perception of it, is that it's doing well for itself, because it's kind of magazine almost is making like art. And it seems to me, I don't know the guys involved in it, but it seems to me that they're incredibly passionate and they're doing something which, for the love of it, and presumably they've worked out an economic model where they can afford to do that, or maybe they don't eat, I don't know. Going back to 2 years ago to when I was working at Total Film, the differences are, I always used to like to think Total Film was funnier and was cheekier and less establishment. Whether that was the truth or whether it was just what I like to think is for others to judge.
Okay. Even though you're not the first journalist to move from Total Film to its kind of higher profile rival, almost from the outside it could be seen as similar to transferring from Tottenham to Arsenal, and even The Guardian described you as defecting. That was their phrase. So how difficult a decision was that, and how do you think other film journalists viewed this move, or does this dividing line not really exist, and am I making up this tribalism?
I don't think it exists anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It used to. When I started out, there was much more of an adversarial relationship between the magazines, to the point that, I think Empire journalists would basically not talk to Top Film journalists. That was my perception. Again, this was 10 years ago. But, we all know each other. Some of us have worked together before. When I was editing Total Film, Mark was editing Empire. I'd been his deputy at Total Film for a year and a half, 2 years. So we weren't suddenly going to stop talking to each other or start rowing. I mean, we try and stitch each other up all the time. And then laugh about it when we got one over on the other one. But there isn't really a tribalism. I mean, I don't think so anyway. That's not my perception of it anymore. I don't know if anyone had any opinion about me leaving. Probably some people were pleased I was no longer their editor. Hopefully some people at Empire were pleased that I would be able to write for the mag. I don't know.
Obviously, as we discussed, Empire is very much a masterclass in branding, as well as being a magazine over an almost 25-year period, and it's been unbelievably successful. However, like anything, it's not without its critics, and a prominent film magazine editor who shall remain nameless once described it as merely an extension of the Hollywood studios' publicity arm. What's your view of the argument that Empire is too soft on studio fare?
I've heard the criticism made that Empire is soft on studio movies, or somehow in the pockets of the studios, or I've had people say to me, how much money did you take for that review? And it's like, dear Lord, if someone was prepared to bribe me for my opinion, give me the cash. But no one ever is. So sometimes it's just mistakes. Sometimes it's you got overexcited. Sometimes you're right and everyone else is wrong. And sometimes maybe things are soft-pedaled. But we're film fans, and we're catering to film fans. We're not The Guardian or Sight and Sound. And I can't really talk for Empire. I'm editor-at-large there. I'm a retained writer, but I'm not on staff there. So talking slightly from the outside, yeah, there's sometimes I look at stuff and go, why have they given that rating? But no one knows. Sometimes it might just be they love the film. And maybe everyone else thinks they're nuts. Well, I loved Speed Racer. I thought it was terrific. I was the only person, it seemed, in the country who liked that film. I wasn't bribed for my opinion. I wasn't being soft on Warner Brothers. I just liked the movie. And I don't think I ever wrote about it. I think I just reviewed it on TV.
I actually avoided it because the critics didn't like it. So, there you go.
I think it's an interesting point, though, because certainly when I worked for Total Film, I always used to think that Empire was soft on big movies and movies from certain filmmakers. So I can't pretend that I think everything's perfect just because I now write for them. I always wanted to have the attitude, though, that we were going into a film as optimistic as we possibly could be and rooting for it to succeed as opposed to hoping for it to fail. I think that some publications, naming no names, take relish in failure and they enjoy their cynicism and they want to sit there and rub their hands and laugh and cackle at people who try and fail, which is fine. You can get your jollies that way. And I'm not saying that we should praise everything to the heavens. I am saying I would try and look for the good rather than just eviscerate the bad. Although you do have to do that sometimes, and sometimes it's fully deserved and very enjoyable. But people, I put Transformers 3 on the cover, for example, which is a new issue. But yeah, why do you think that decision was made? Do you think that decision was made because everyone in that office thinks Transformers 3 is going to be the greatest film in the history of humanity? Well, I haven't spoken to everybody in the office, I haven't spoken to anybody in the office about that film. I fairly confidently assert they don't think it's going to be the greatest film in the history of humanity, but I can also assert they think it's going to be the film that will sell most issues this month. It's the argument about Hollywood in general and Hollywood films. Oh, grief, why do they make this crap? Well, they make this crap because it sells. Because people go and see it. People aren't, they're not setting out to make bad movies just for the hell of it, or movies which are considered crass just for the hell of it. They're making movies that they think will sell. It's a business. So, yeah, the new Ken Loach movie ain't going to go on the cover of Empire. Although there is an interview with him, very fine one in the latest issue of Empire.
On newsstands now. Obviously, we here at Industrial Scripts, we deal with an awful lot of filmmakers, writers, producers. From the ones that I've worked with and talked to, I definitely think if you canvassed opinion, they would say British film critics are extremely tough on British films. Lower budget British films. What's your sort of take on that?
I think it's absolutely true. I think British critics are harder on British film, particularly British independent film, than they would be on American independent film. Or French independent film. Well, everything French feels independent, isn't it? I think there are films which get a free pass from America because they're American, because they're kind of cutesy and indie, and those kind of Sundance pictures which make me want to burn the negative.
The faux indie,
yeah,
as it was called.
And I think there's a couple of things going on there in terms of how British critics or film journalists react to British film. Sometimes it's just because the films are bad. That can just be the case that the film is awful. Sometimes it is just familiarity breeds contempt. And sometimes it's envy.
Well, I was going to say, the critic turned screenwriter is a road that a lot of critics would like to go down. The critic turned filmmaker is another road. So do you think that plays into it at all? I
think if you watch a small British independent movie, there's always the sense that you could have done it yourself. as opposed to, say, you're watching a Steven Spielberg epic production that cost $200 million. Well, you ain't thinking you could walk down the road and buy a handy cam and knock that out, but you may think, oh, that 3-person character drama, I could do that. And of course you can't. Well, you could, but in which case do it. You know, if you could make that film, go and make that film. That's why Commode's such a good critic, I think, because he's very upfront about acknowledging the fact that a lot of people want to be filmmakers. He doesn't want to be filmmakers. He just loves what he does now, and he relishes it, and he gives his opinion. Goodness knows I disagree with him a lot of the time, but he's very entertaining, and he knows his stuff, and he can broadcast and write, which is quite rare, I think, to have people who can do both well. And I really admire him for that. So returning to your original point, though, about whether Brits are harder on Brit films, yeah, I think so.
Obviously, journalistic opportunities in the last few years have been hit hard by the rise, as you said, of e-publishing, websites, blogs, and this almost avalanche of information that you can get elsewhere, so why would you pay for it? Are you optimistic about the future of film journalism as an actual paid profession? It feels to me, looking from the outside, like after a very, very sluggish start, the major sort of journalistic publications are beginning to work out how to monetize that online content. How do you feel? Are you optimistic for the film journalists of tomorrow?
I think film journalism will continue the same as any other journalism will continue. I think it will get smaller. I think the pressure will increase. I think it will get harder to get into as a paid endeavour. The more people do something for free, the harder it is to get paid for it. You know, plumbers wouldn't be able to charge a fortune if everyone could fix their own toilets. So when you've got everybody in the world thinks they can write about film, and some of them are very good, but if that information is readily available, you know, people used to buy Time Out all the time because it's how they found out what went on in London. Well, now they can find out 100 different ways. And it's the same with film magazines, I would say. You know, you can find that information. So it's no longer about information. And I remember when I used to read Neon, I would know when it was coming out. I would go to the newsagents on the day it was coming out, and I'd buy it, go home, and just read it cover to cover. I don't know that would be the case now. If I was an 18-year-old now getting into film, there's lots of stuff out there, lots of information. And it's winnowing it out and figuring out what the good stuff is. Because there's a lot of stuff out there, it's not very much good stuff. It's remarkable, really, when you consider how many people have access to computers and how many people have access to film. It's remarkable that there are more resources available. You look at this series of Q&As which you're doing, which is a really good idea. You look at Jeff Goldsmith, the creator of Screenwriting magazine. I think his Q&As are superb. That's about it. For film craft Q&As, that seems extraordinary to me, that there wouldn't be more stuff there. It's also extraordinary to me that they're free. It'd be interesting to see how the paywall works out at the Times and News of the World. I don't know. I have no information whatsoever on that.
Well, something like the iPad may be critical in all this, because when we're all wandering around with our iPads and we want proper content, and the only way for us to get our proper content is to sign up for, the iPad app, then maybe that'll be a big difference, and it'll be very much technology driven.
I think that's true. I think magazines will survive in their physical form, though, as well, just because people want to read something in the bath. Very practical things like that. Is people want to read something in the lav, they want to read something in the bath. They want to be able to fold it up and shove it in their jacket when they're on the tube. So they'll survive, but I think they will get fewer. Bluntly, though, if I was 18, I don't know that I'd want to be a film journalist. Not now. I think it's got a lot harder. I think it's a lot harder to break in than it was. I mean, I felt like it was hard 10 years ago. I think it's harder now. I think the opportunities are going to reduce in that regard. Where people do have an opportunity is because the internet is free publishing, because you have your own platform. If you are really good, then you can stand out. You can also stand out if you're cheaply controversial and offensive, which is how some people choose to stand out and get a following that way, which is fine for them. But that's exciting if you have the opportunities to interview people, for example. Or what if you set yourself up as a brand, as a site, with a donations box, or people had to pay but they knew that what they were going to get was great. Well, in that case, you don't need anyone else to act as your gatekeeper. You don't need to get someone like Total Film or Empire to give you work experience. You can show yourself to be good enough anyway. The problem, of course, then is getting the interviews. But that's hard without the contacts and without the legitimacy that something like Empire provides. If you get an email that says nev@empiremagazine.com, you go, oh, I've heard of Empire. Whereas if you get, jblogs@jblogs.com, someone might not even read it. There's so much clamouring for people's attention that both readers and the filmmakers and the actors and the studios just want to get stuff out there as much as possible. It's become much more about quantity than it has about quality.
Moving on to your own ambitions, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? Would you ever launch your own outlet, or do you want to move on to other writing areas, books, screenplays, or are you like Kermode, an out-and-out film journalist?
I suspect that through choice first, and if not through choice first, then ultimately by necessity, I will have to do something else. Which is to do with personal kind of lifestyle things, really. There's still a living to be made, I think, as a film journalist, particularly if you've done it for a few years and you've got whatever contacts you've got. But it requires you to be in London, largely, and I don't want to be. I want to be with my kids and my wife in the country. And I'm in a position now where I can sustain that. I'm not sure that that position will be sustainable in 5 years' time, with the way that the market changes and such. I'm not pessimistic. I think things will work out fine, one way or another.
No, we encourage blunt answers here. So what advice, finally, would you give to people looking to move into film journalism?
You have to really, really love it. And it sounds like quite trite advice. But it's not glamorous. There are glamorous bits. There are exciting bits. There are great moments where you can't believe that you're in a certain situation. But most of it isn't like that. Most of it is a job. And it's a job that you feel blessed to do because it's something that you enjoy and it's in a field that you enjoy. But people who are getting into it because they want to meet famous people, no, don't do that. People who are getting into it because they want to make money, no, don't do that. They do something else. There's way more successful ways to make money. I'd say the other thing is, I think, that it's changed so much, or it's changing so much, that a single discipline is not going to necessarily be enough. There was a time when you could earn a lot of money as a film critic, just as a film critic. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure that there are certain broadsheet critics who earn a decent wage because they're very good writers. But I think people are going to be required to do more. And I think that goes across the board, really. People aren't going to be one thing. They're not just going to be that guy's a film critic. It'll be that guy's a film critic, and he's writing a novel, and he's also running that podcast, and he's running that website, and he's doing this. So you've got to be prepared to be diverse, I guess.
Quick fire round. Your favourite ever film?
Fight Club.
Favourite screenwriter?
William Goldman, because of his personality as much as he was wrong.
Favourite director?
Fincher.
Favourite performance by an actor?
Al Pacino and Godfather 2.
Favourite interview subject?
Fincher.
Worst interview subject? Favourite TV show?
The Wire. That's original.
James Cameron or Ridley Scott?
James Cameron.
Mike Lee or Ken Loach?
Ken Loach.
Pacino or De Niro?
Pacino.
Your best ever moment as a film journalist?
Sitting in Jack Nicholson's house and talking to him about Stanley Kubrick.
Your worst ever moment as a film journalist?
Got to say, interviewing the Wayne brothers was not fun.
Last film you saw?
Blooded.
Your filmic guilty pleasure?
Love Actually.
Okay. Finally, your dream dinner party guests. You can pick 4 people from history to come around to dinner. You're cooking.
Jesus. Stanley Kubrick.
You going to invite any women?
Well, Grace Kelly.
Grace Kelly, okay.
So it's me, Kubrick, Grace Kelly, and Jesus. And C.S. Lewis.
C.S. Lewis. Nev Pearce, thanks a lot.
Thank you.